Welcome to Artificial Fictions. We post new scary stories every day written by artificial intelligence. I hope you enjoy them. Once upon a time, in a small town nestled in the mountains, there was a string of mysterious disappearances. Every few months, a restaurant owner would vanish without a trace, leaving behind only unanswered questions and whispered rumors. The locals whispered about a strange man who would visit each restaurant shortly before the owner disappeared. He was tall and thin, with piercing eyes that seemed to see into your soul. No one knew his name or where he came from, but his presence always sent a shiver down their spines. The first restaurant owner to vanish was Mr. Thompson, who ran the Cozy Diner on Main Street. He had just finished serving the mysterious man his meal when he suddenly disappeared without a word. The patrons and staff searched the restaurant from top to bottom, but there was no sign of Mr. Thompson anywhere. As the months passed, more restaurant owners met the same fate. Each time, the mysterious man would visit the establishment, order a meal, and then the owner would vanish without a trace. The townsfolk grew fearful, avoiding any restaurant the mysterious man was rumored to frequent. But no matter where they went, he always seemed to find them. One night, a brave young waitress named Emily decided to confront the mysterious man. As he sat alone at a table in the corner, she approached him, her heart pounding in her chest. "Why do you keep coming here?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man looked up, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "I come for the food," he replied cryptically. Before Emily could say another word, the man stood up and vanished into the night, leaving behind nothing but an icy chill in the air. From that night on, no one in the town ever saw the mysterious man again. But the disappearances continued, a haunting reminder of the sinister presence that had once stalked their streets. And to this day, the truth behind the vanishing restaurant owners remains a chilling mystery, lost to the shadows of the mountains. Once upon a time, there was a guy named Jake. He delivered pizzas for a living. One dark, stormy night, he got an order for a house on the outskirts of town. Jake didn't like going there because it was creepy, but he needed the money. So he grabbed the pizza and drove off. When Jake arrived, the house looked even scarier in the dim light. He rang the doorbell, but no one answered. Just as he was about to leave, the door creaked open on its own. Jake hesitated, but decided to go inside since he didn't want to waste time. The inside of the house was cold and eerie. Jake called out, "Pizza delivery!" But there was no response. He walked further into the house, feeling uneasy. Suddenly, he heard a faint whispering sound coming from upstairs. Ignoring his fear, Jake climbed the stairs. As he reached the top, the whispering grew louder. He followed the sound to a room at the end of the hallway. The door was slightly ajar, and Jake pushed it open. Inside, he saw a shadowy figure hunched over a table. It looked like someone was eating, but Jake couldn't see their face. He called out again, but the figure didn't respond. Feeling a chill run down his spine, Jake took a step back. That's when the figure suddenly turned towards him, revealing a face covered in scars and an unsettling grin. Jake froze in terror as the figure stood up and slowly shuffled towards him. Without a word, Jake dropped the pizza and ran out of the house as fast as he could. As he drove away, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he had just narrowly escaped something truly horrifying. From that day on, he avoided delivering pizzas to the house on the outskirts of town, always fearing what might be lurking inside. Once there was a girl named Sarah who worked as a babysitter. One evening, she was asked to babysit for a family she had never met before. The house was old and isolated, nestled deep in the woods. Sarah felt a little uneasy, but she needed the money, so she agreed to take the job. When Sarah arrived, the parents hurriedly left, leaving her alone with their sleeping child. As the night grew darker, strange noises began to echo through the house. Sarah tried to ignore them, but they seemed to get louder and closer. Suddenly, she heard a faint tapping on the window. She glanced outside but saw nothing except the darkness of the forest. Then, the tapping grew louder, as if someone, or something, was trying to get in. Heart pounding, Sarah went to check on the child. That's when she saw it, a dark figure standing in the corner of the room, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Frozen in fear, Sarah couldn't move as the figure slowly approached her. Just as it reached out to touch her, Sarah screamed and bolted out of the house. She ran through the woods, branches scratching at her skin, until she reached the nearest neighbor's house. When the police arrived, they searched the house but found no sign of the mysterious figure. The family returned home to find Sarah shaken and terrified. From that night on, she never babysat in that part of town again, haunted by the memory of what lurked in the darkness of that isolated house. In a small town, there was a legend about an old cemetery that was said to be haunted. Despite the warnings, a group of curious teenagers decided to explore it one Halloween night. As they wandered among the tombstones, the air grew thick with an eerie fog, making it difficult to see. Suddenly, one of the teens, named Alex, felt a cold hand grip their shoulder. They turned around, expecting to see one of their friends playing a prank, but no one was there. Nervously laughing it off, the group continued deeper into the cemetery. But the atmosphere grew more oppressive, and strange shadows seemed to move among the graves. As they reached the center of the cemetery, they stumbled upon an open grave with fresh soil. Without warning, a skeletal hand burst from the ground, grabbing Alex's ankle. Screaming in terror, Alex struggled to break free as the other teens watched in horror. With a final desperate tug, Alex managed to escape the grasp of the skeletal hand. They scrambled out of the grave and ran as fast as they could, leaving the cemetery behind them. When they returned to town, they vowed never to speak of their terrifying experience again. But late at night, they couldn't shake the feeling that something dark and malevolent still lurked within the haunted cemetery, waiting to claim its next victim. In a sleepy town nestled in the countryside, there was an abandoned mansion that loomed over the landscape like a dark shadow. The locals whispered about the tragic history of the mansion, where a wealthy family had met a grisly end many years ago. Despite the warnings, a group of adventurous teenagers decided to explore the mansion one moonlit night. They crept through the overgrown gardens and creaky gates, their hearts pounding with excitement and fear. As they ventured deeper into the mansion, they were greeted by eerie silence broken only by the sound of their own footsteps echoing through the empty halls. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, and cobwebs hung like drapes from the ceiling. Suddenly, they heard a faint whispering coming from the darkness ahead. Trembling with fear, they followed the sound to a grand ballroom at the heart of the mansion. There, they saw a figure standing in the center of the room, bathed in moonlight. It was a woman, dressed in a tattered gown, her face obscured by shadows. "Who are you?" one of the teenagers called out, their voice quivering. The woman turned slowly towards them, her eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. "I am the mistress of this mansion," she whispered, her voice echoing through the room. The teenagers watched in horror as the woman floated towards them, her movements graceful yet unnatural. With a chilling smile, she beckoned them closer, promising to show them the secrets hidden within the mansion's walls. But before they could react, the mansion began to shake and groan as if it were alive. The walls seemed to twist and contort, trapping the teenagers inside with the vengeful spirit of the mistress. With a final scream, the mansion collapsed in on itself, swallowing the teenagers whole and sealing their fate within its crumbling ruins. And to this day, the abandoned mansion remains a cursed and haunted relic, a warning to all who dare to trespass on its dark and tragic history. In a large empty office building nestled in the heart of the city, there was an overnight janitor named Carl. He was a solitary figure, known for his odd behavior and unsettling demeanor. Every night, as the rest of the city slept, Carl would roam the empty halls of the office building, his footsteps echoing through the silent corridors. He had a habit of lurking in the shadows, watching and waiting as if he were searching for something or someone. The other employees whispered about Carl, saying that he was not quite right in the head. Some claimed to have seen him talking to himself in hushed tones, his eyes filled with a strange intensity. But it wasn't until one fateful night that the true extent of Carl's creepiness was revealed. A young woman named Jenna, who worked late hours at the office, found herself alone with Carl one night. As she worked diligently at her desk, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Suddenly, she heard a soft whispering coming from the darkness behind her. Startled, she turned around to find Carl standing there, his eyes fixed on her with a disturbing intensity. "Can I help you with something?" Jenna asked nervously, trying to maintain her composure. Carl smiled, revealing a row of yellowed teeth. "Just making sure everything is clean," he replied in a voice that sent shivers down Jenna's spine. As Jenna watched in horror, Carl began to shuffle closer, his movements slow and deliberate. She could see something glinting in his hand, a rusty old key that seemed to pulsate with malevolent energy. With a sudden surge of fear, Jenna bolted from her desk and ran for the exit, the sound of Carl's footsteps echoing behind her. She burst through the doors and into the cool night air, gasping for breath as she fled from the building. From that night on, Jenna refused to work late hours at the office, haunted by the memory of Carl's chilling presence. And as for Carl, he continued his nightly routine, his strange whispers echoing through the empty halls of the office building, a silent reminder of the darkness that lurked within. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, there was an old, dilapidated house that stood abandoned for years. Locals whispered about the tragic events that had unfolded within its walls, a family torn apart by madness and despair. One day, a young couple named Mark and Emily decided to explore the abandoned house out of sheer curiosity. Armed with flashlights and nerves of steel, they ventured inside, their hearts pounding with excitement and trepidation. As they made their way through the dusty corridors and decaying rooms, they felt an oppressive atmosphere closing in around them. The air was heavy with the weight of forgotten memories, and strange shadows seemed to dance along the walls. Suddenly, they heard a faint scratching sound coming from the darkness ahead. Emily's breath caught in her throat as they cautiously approached, their flashlights trembling in their hands. They rounded a corner and came face to face with a sight that sent chills down their spines. A row of old photographs lining the walls, each one depicting the same family that had once lived in the house. But as they looked closer, they realized that there was something terribly wrong with the photographs. The faces of the family members were twisted and contorted into grotesque expressions of agony and despair. As they stared in horror, the scratching sound grew louder, echoing through the empty house like a sinister melody. And then, without warning, the photographs began to move, their eyes following Mark and Emily as they stumbled backwards in terror. With a sudden surge of fear, they turned and ran for the exit, their footsteps echoing through the abandoned house as they fled into the night. From that day on, Mark and Emily never spoke of their terrifying encounter in the abandoned house. But in the darkness of their nightmares, they could still hear the scratching sound and feel the chilling gaze of the twisted faces that haunted their memories. And as for the abandoned house, it remained a silent monument to the horrors that lurked within its walls, waiting to ensnare anyone foolish enough to venture inside. In a quaint suburban neighborhood, there lived a young woman named Lily. She was happily married to her husband, John, and they had 2 children, a son named Ethan and a daughter named Sarah. But one by one, Lily's loved ones began to mysteriously disappear. It started with Ethan. One morning, Lily went to wake him up for school, but his bed was empty. Frantic with worry, she searched the house from top to bottom, but there was no sign of him anywhere. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Distraught and bewildered, Lily and John contacted the authorities, but despite their best efforts, Ethan was never found. Then, just a few months later, Sarah disappeared in the same inexplicable manner. Lily and John were beside themselves with grief, their once happy home now filled with sorrow and fear. As the years passed, Lily's friends and extended family members also began to vanish without a trace. Each disappearance left Lily feeling more isolated and alone, as if the world were slowly closing in around her. Desperate for answers, Lily delved into the mysteries surrounding her loved ones' disappearances. She scoured old family records, interviewed neighbors and friends, and even consulted with psychics and mediums. But no matter how hard she searched, the truth remained elusive. The disappearances remained unsolved, leaving Lily trapped in a nightmare from which she could not awaken. And as the years went by, Lily found herself haunted by the chilling possibility that she, too, would one day join her loved ones in their mysterious fate. A fate that seemed to lurk just beyond the edges of her consciousness, waiting to claim her as its next victim. In a remote village nestled deep within the mountains, there was a legend of a cursed forest that few dared to enter. It was said that anyone who ventured into the forest never returned, their screams echoing through the trees as they were consumed by darkness. Despite the warnings, a group of adventurous teenagers decided to explore the forest one moonlit night. Armed with flashlights and a sense of reckless abandon, they ventured into the heart of the cursed woods, their laughter echoing through the silent night. But as they delved deeper into the forest, the air grew thick with an oppressive darkness that seemed to suffocate them. Strange whispers danced on the wind, and twisted shadows flitted through the trees, watching their every move with malevolent intent. Suddenly, they stumbled upon an ancient, crumbling cabin hidden deep within the forest. It loomed before them like a silent sentinel, its windows boarded up and its door hanging askew on its hinges. With a sense of trepidation, the teenagers cautiously approached the cabin, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they stepped inside, they were greeted by a cold, musty air that sent shivers down their spines. The interior of the cabin was dark and foreboding, filled with shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. But despite their fear, the teenagers pressed on, driven by a morbid curiosity that refused to be quenched. As they explored the cabin, they stumbled upon a hidden trapdoor concealed beneath a rug in the corner of the room. With trembling hands, they lifted the trapdoor and descended into the darkness below. But as they reached the bottom of the stairs, they were greeted by a sight that filled them with unspeakable horror. A room filled with the bones of those who had dared to enter the cursed forest before them. With a collective scream, the teenagers turned and fled from the cabin, their hearts pounding in their chests as they raced through the darkness of the forest. But no matter how fast they ran, they could still hear the echoes of their own screams, mingling with the chilling whispers of the cursed woods. And as they stumbled out of the forest and into the safety of the moonlit night, they knew that they had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death, a fate that awaited any who dared to enter the cursed forest and disturb the darkness that lay within. On a moonless night, Emily found herself driving home alone along a deserted stretch of highway. The road stretched out before her like a ribbon of darkness, the only illumination coming from the headlights of her car. As she drove, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of uneasy that settled over her like a heavy cloak. It felt as though someone, or something, was watching her from the shadows, lurking just beyond the reach of her headlights. Glancing in her rearview mirror, Emily's heart skipped a beat as she saw a pair of headlights looming in the distance, steadily gaining ground on her car. At first, she dismissed it as another late-night traveler, but as the headlights drew closer, she realized with a sinking feeling that they were following her. Panic rising in her chest, Emily pressed down on the accelerator, willing her car to go faster. But no matter how fast she drove, the headlights behind her remained a constant presence, casting a menacing glow in her rearview mirror. With trembling hands, Emily reached for her phone to call for help, but her fingers froze as she saw the screen was blank, the battery drained of power. Heart pounding, Emily racked her brain for a plan. She couldn't shake the feeling that whoever, or whatever, was following her meant her harm. As she approached a deserted intersection, Emily made a split-second decision. With a sharp turn of the wheel, she veered off the highway and onto a narrow dirt road, hoping to lose her pursuer in the darkness. But as she glanced back, Emily's blood ran cold as she saw the headlights following her every move, drawing closer and closer with each passing second. With no other options left, Emily drove faster, her heart pounding in her chest as she raced towards the safety of her home. And as she finally pulled into her driveway and slammed the door behind her, she couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness that had pursued her on that lonely stretch of highway was still lurking just beyond the shadows, waiting for its next opportunity to strike.